Hello, my name is Josh Fair. I'm currently taking Physics 2212 at Georgia Tech, and this is my lab video. This lab discusses the charge tape activity and electric force and magnitude. Introduction and models. Now, this lab discusses four key topics, the first being Coulomb's law, which explains the electric force of attraction or repulsion between two stationary objects, followed by gravitational force, which deals with the force applied from one object to another in terms of gravity, then followed by Newton's third law, which states for an action, there is an opposite and equal reaction, which would be relevant when dealing with the floating tapes. And finally, vectors, which are arrows that indicate magnitude and direction. As you can see, this slide just shows the formulas listed before with the four topics listed before with their individual formulas: Coulomb's law, gravitational force, and Newton's third law. These will be used later in the code in the experiment to calculate key values. Now, the purpose of this lab was to use tape to demonstrate the concept of charges and attraction by using two pieces of tape and trying to see if they would repel or attract one another for one to flow above the other depending on the charges. As you can see on the right, this is the model kind of itself, and the original tape of position B is lifted up as it's repelling from position A. This is similar to the experimental model. The system being those two tapes and the surroundings being the places and the air. And this is also a general overview of the data we got from the experimental model itself: the mass of the tape, the length of the tape, distance separated, and the width of the tape, all listed here. Now moving on to the first portion of the lab, the experimental part. Now the steps of the experiment were to determine the charge of one tape and meant to float one tape above another to see which had a resulting repulsing force. From this experiment, my group was able to observe that tapes 1 and 2 repelled each other, the tape and pen attracted each other, and the pen attracted the tape, which means that the tapes were the same charge, and the tape and the pen were different charges. Now, the experimental data we gathered from this section include the length of the tape, the mass of the tape, the distance separated, the magnitude of the gravitational force, and the magnitude of the electric force. Gravitational force and electric force were opposites of one another due to Newton's third law and were calculated with mass and gravity. Now, moving on to the coding section. The code itself was made in Glowscript and includes various formulas from before and has the initial conditions of the experiment listed under constants right here. The assumptions for the code are also listed. Air resistance is ignored. Treat a long tape as a point charge. Each U tape has the same charge as well. The similarities between the experiment and the model prediction is very similar, as both use Newton's laws and Coulomb's law to produce results. Now, this is the final model that the computational model produced. The charges themselves are not present, and this is likely due to some math or sign error in my code. But as you can see, the magnitude of the charge on the tape is also demonstrated, but it's a pretty wonky number, and again, this is probably due to some coding error. So, discussion and conclusion. What if electrons had positive charge and protons had negative charge? Well, in this situation, the direction of the fields would change, but overall, the simulation would remain the same, as since the charges are flipped, the tapes would still repel as the state would be the same charge. And what does it mean? Is it important to handle the charged tapes as little as possible? Yes. When the objects come into contact with a person's hand, they lose charge and become neutral. As the charges shock off, this impacts the experiment as the tapes become less charged, and thus the reaction will be less. And that is it. Overall, the experiment showed that the tapes have the same charge and thus repelled.